The gunshot shattered the dawn quiet of Oregon City's Main Street, startling Violet Reynolds awake from her fitful sleep on the hard wooden bench outside the sheriff's office. She had been waiting there all night, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her once fine blue dress rumpled and stained with the dust of 3 days' hard travel across the Oregon Territory in the summer of 1873. Sheriff Tate emerged from his office, holstering his pistol after the accidental discharge. His weathered face contorted in surprise at the sight of the young woman scrambling to her feet. "Madam, you been out here all night?" Violet's voice cracked as she spoke, desperation evident in every syllable. "Yes, sir, I need help. I've come all the way from Portland." "My husband," she faltered, the words catching in her throat. "He sold my baby, my little girl, just 6 months old." The sheriff's expression hardened, but his eyes reflected doubt. "That's a serious accusation, madam. Best come inside." Inside the cramped office, Violet recounted her story in halting words. Her husband Thomas, a failed businessman with mounting gambling debts, had disappeared with their infant daughter Emily 3 days prior. A neighbor had witnessed him meeting with a wealthy-looking couple at the train station, handing over the child and receiving something in return. By the time Violet returned from her work at the seamstress shop, both were gone along with all traces of her baby. "I'll telegraph surrounding towns," Sheriff Tate said without much conviction, but without knowing where they went. The door swung open, cutting off his words. A tall man entered, trail dust coating his worn buckskin jacket. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of his Stetson, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw. Despite the early hour, his blue eyes were alert, taking in the scene before him with swift assessment. "Drake," the sheriff nodded. "Thought you were still down Pendleton way." "Got back last night," the man replied, his deep voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas territories. He glanced at Violet, noting her distress even as he removed his hat in the presence of a lady. "Drake Blackwell," the sheriff said by way of introduction. "Best tracker in the territory. Miss Reynolds here has a situation I was just explaining is likely hopeless." Fresh tears spilled down Violet's cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "Someone must help me." Drake's expression remained impassive as the sheriff recounted Violet's story, but something flickered in his eyes when the baby was mentioned. "He sold your baby," Drake repeated, his voice careful and measured. Violet nodded, unable to speak through her grief. Drake settled his hat back on his head with deliberate slowness. "Then we'll find that child no matter what." "Now hold on," Sheriff Tate protested. "This isn't official business. The husband has legal rights to sell his own flesh and blood." Drake's voice cut like a knife. "No law I know gives a man that right." He turned to Violet. "When did they leave? What direction?" Hope kindled in Violet's chest for the first time in days. 3 days ago. "The neighbor said they boarded the eastbound train," Drake nodded. "Eastbound narrows it down." "Sheriff, I need whatever information you have on this Thomas Reynolds." "I don't have anything," Tate grumbled. "Never met the man." "I can tell you," Violet interjected eagerly. "Everything I know." "You'll need money," the sheriff warned. "Drake doesn't work for free." Violet's face fell. She had nothing. Her husband had cleared out their meager savings before disappearing. "We'll discuss payment later," Drake said, his eyes never leaving Violet's face. "First, we find your daughter. Can you ride, Mrs. Reynolds?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, though it had been years. "Good. We leave in an hour." He turned to go, then paused. "Pack light. Where we're going, you won't need much." An hour later, Violet stood outside the livery stable in a borrowed riding skirt, clutching a small bag containing her few possessions. Drake approached leading 2 horses, a sturdy chestnut mare for her, and his own powerful black stallion. Eastbound train 3 days ago would have stopped in Baker City, then on to Boise in Idaho Territory, Drake explained as he helped her mount. If they were headed further, they'd need to rest the baby. We'll start with those towns. As they rode out of Oregon City, Violet studied her unlikely champion. Drake Blackwell rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His face, when not obscured by the brim of his hat, showed a man in his early 30s who had seen his share of hardships. The lines around his eyes spoke of squinting into desert suns, and there was a healed scar along his jawline that disappeared into his beard. "Why are you helping me?" Violet finally asked as they followed the trail eastward, the morning sun warming their backs. Drake was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "No child deserves to be treated like property," he finally said, his voice low. "And no mother deserves to have her child taken." He offered nothing more, and Violet didn't press. They rode hard that day, stopping only to rest the horses. Violet's body protested the unaccustomed activity, but she refused to complain. Each mile brought her closer to Emily, and she would endure any discomfort for that. As twilight descended, Drake led them off the main trail to a small clearing beside a creek. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, dismounting and helping Violet from her saddle. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground. Drake's strong hands steadied her, and for a moment she was acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of leather and trail dust, the warmth of his calloused hands through the thin fabric of her sleeves. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping away once she was sure her legs would support her. Drake busied himself making camp, tending to the horses before building a small fire. From his saddlebags he produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee. "It's not much," he apologized, handing her a tin plate. "It's more than I've had since." Violet's voice faltered. "Since I discovered they were gone." As the fire crackled between them, Violet told Drake everything about her husband. Thomas Reynolds had come to Portland 2 years earlier, full of charm and grand schemes. Violet, 22 and working as a seamstress after her parents' death, had been swept off her feet by his attention. Their courtship had been brief, the marriage hasty. It wasn't until after they were wed that Thomas's true nature emerged: his drinking, his gambling, his swift temper. "When I told him I was with child, he seemed happy," she recalled, staring into the flames. "But after Emily was born, things changed. He resented the time I spent with her, the money she required." Her voice broke. "I never thought he would, that he could." "Some men aren't meant to be fathers," Drake said quietly. "What kind of monster sells his own child?" Violet whispered, the question tearing from her throat. Drake's jaw tightened. "The kind we're going to find." The night grew cold, and Drake offered Violet his bedroll, insisting he was accustomed to sleeping rough. As she lay beneath the blanket that smelled faintly of him, watching the stars through the trees, Violet wondered about the taciturn cowboy who had so readily come to her aid. "Mr. Blackwell," she ventured into the darkness, "you never did say why you're doing this." There was a long pause before he answered. "I knew someone once who lost a child, not the same way, but—" His voice trailed off. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Reynolds. We have a long ride tomorrow." Violet wanted to ask more, but respected his reticence. As exhaustion overtook her, her last thoughts were of Emily's tiny fingers and the surprising gentleness in Drake Blackwell's hands as he had helped her from her horse. They reached Baker City by midday the following day. The town bustled with activity: miners, merchants, and travelers moving between the wooden buildings that lined the main street. Drake led them directly to the train station, where he approached the station master with quiet authority. "Looking for information on passengers who came through 3 days back. Eastbound train. Man traveling with a woman and infant," the The station master, a bespectacled man with thinning hair, squinted at Drake. "I remember most who come through. What's your interest?" "The child was taken unlawfully," Drake stated, his hand resting casually near his holster. The station master's eyes widened. "No trouble in my station, mister." "No trouble intended," Drake assured him. "Just information." The man hesitated, then nodded. "There was a couple with a baby. Fancy dressed. Said they were continuing on to Boys, then Salt Lake City. Man traveling with them wasn't dressed as fine. Thought he might be hired help." Violet stepped forward eagerly. "The baby, was it a little girl?" "6 months old with dark curls," the station master nodded. "Pretty little thing, crying something fierce when they boarded. The woman looked like she didn't know what to do with it." Violet's heart constricted. "That's Emily, my Emily." "They bought 3 tickets all the way to Salt Lake," the station master added. "The poorly dressed fella got off here, though. Said something about staying back." Drake's expression darkened. "Thomas Reynolds, he's still in town." The station master shrugged. "If that's his name, don't know where he went after leaving the station." "I know where men like him go," Drake said grimly. "Mrs. Reynolds, wait here." "No," Violet said firmly. "If Thomas is here, I'm coming with you." Drake studied her determined face for a moment, then nodded. "Stay behind me." They checked 3 saloons before finding Thomas in the 4th, the Silver Dollar, a rough establishment at the edge of town. He sat at a card table, a stack of chips before him, a whiskey glass in hand. He looked exactly as Violet remembered, handsome in a sharp, predatory way. His brown hair slicked back, his mustache neatly trimmed. Violet's body trembled with rage at the sight of him gambling while their daughter was in the hands of strangers. Before Drake could stop her, she pushed through the saloon doors and strode toward the table. "Thomas." Her voice rang out, stopping conversation throughout the room. Thomas's head snapped up, his face paling as he recognized his wife. "Violet, what are you? How did you? Where is she?" Violet demanded, reaching the table. "Where is our daughter?" Thomas's expression shifted from shock to calculation. "Now, Violet, let me explain." Drake appeared beside Violet, his presence commanding attention. "I'd listen to your explanation too, Reynolds." Thomas's eyes narrowed as he assessed the newcomer. "This doesn't concern you, stranger." "You sold your baby," Drake stated, his voice deadly quiet. "That makes it my concern." Thomas laughed nervously, looking around at the other card players. "This is absurd. I didn't sell anyone. The Millers adopted our child. Violet wasn't coping with motherhood and I did what was best." "Liar!" Violet cried, lunging forward. Drake caught her arm gently, restraining her while keeping his eyes fixed on Thomas. "The Millers, heading to Salt Lake City." Thomas's surprise confirmed it before he could speak. "How much did they pay you?" Drake pressed, his voice still unnervingly calm. The other card players began to edge away from the table, sensing trouble. "Look," Thomas said, lowering his voice, "it was a private arrangement. The Millers are wealthy. They can give the child opportunities we never could. $500 is a fair." The words were cut off as Violet broke free from Drake's light grasp and slapped Thomas hard across the face. "You sold our daughter for gambling money." Thomas rose, knocking over his chair. His hand went to his face, then balled into a fist. "You always were too emotional, Violet." Drake stepped between them, his hand now resting openly on his revolver. "You raise that hand to her, and it'll be the last thing you do." Thomas froze, assessing the threat in Drake's eyes. Whatever he saw there made him reconsider. He lowered his fist slowly. "What do you want?" he asked sullenly. "Information," Drake replied. "Everything about these Millers, where they're from, where they're going, how you met them." Thomas glanced at his chips on the table, clearly calculating his options. "And if I tell you, then you walk away from here," Drake said evenly. And if I don't, Drake's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll escort you to the sheriff and charge you with human trafficking. Thomas paled. You can't try me. The standoff lasted only seconds before Thomas deflated. Fine. Alexander and Catherine Miller from San Francisco, wealthy shipping family. They're staying with Catherine's sister in Salt Lake City for a month before returning to California. How did you meet them? Violet demanded. Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. They put word out they were looking to adopt, discreetly. No questions asked. Address in Salt Lake, Drake pressed. Thomas hesitated, then scribbled something on a scrap of paper. That's all I know. Drake took the paper and tucked it into his pocket. One more thing, sign this. He produced a document from inside his jacket. What is it? Thomas asked suspiciously. Divorce papers, giving Violet full custody of Emily upon her recovery. Thomas's eyes widened. I'm not signing anything without. Drake leaned forward, his voice so low only Thomas could hear the words. Whatever he said made the blood drain from Thomas's face. With shaking hands, Thomas signed the paper. Now get out of my sight, Drake said, stepping back. If I ever see you again, especially near Mrs. Reynolds or her daughter, what happens won't be pretty. Thomas gathered his chips hurriedly, casting one last glance at Violet. For a moment, something like regret crossed his face, but it vanished quickly. Without another word, he pushed past them and out of the saloon. Outside in the fading daylight, Violet's legs finally gave way. Drake caught her before she could fall, guiding her to a bench outside the saloon. He actually admitted it, she whispered, shock and relief warring in her voice. He sold her for $500. Drake knelt before her, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. We know where they're going now. Salt Lake City is 4 days hard ride from here, or 2 by train if we can catch tomorrow's. Violet looked up, determination replacing shock. Train. We need to catch them before they leave Salt Lake. Drake nodded. We'll get tickets tonight. The train leaves at dawn. The paper you made him sign, not legally binding without a judge, but it might help later. Drake's expression softened slightly. He won't bother you again. What did you say to him? At the end, a shadow crossed Drake's face. Nothing that matters, only that I meant what I said. They secured passage on the morning train and spent the night at a modest boarding house. Violet lay awake in her narrow bed, too agitated to sleep. Emily was alive. She was with people who had paid for her, which meant they valued her, even if their methods were reprehensible. But what if they'd already grown attached to her? What if they refused to give her back? Morning came after a restless night. Drake was waiting outside the boarding house when Violet emerged, 2 cups of coffee and a small package of biscuits in hand. Thought you might need this, he said, offering her the breakfast. The gesture, small as it was, nearly undid her. After months of Thomas's neglect and cruelty, the simple kindness seemed extraordinary. Thank you, she managed, taking the coffee. They boarded the train in silence, finding seats across from each other in a passenger car. As the train pulled away from Baker City, Violet watched the landscape begin to blur past the window. Each turn of the wheels carried her closer to Emily, yet the journey still seemed interminable. Tell me about her, Drake said unexpectedly, breaking the silence between them. Violet looked up, surprised. Emily, Drake nodded. She's beautiful, Violet began, her voice warming. Born with a full head of dark hair just like mine, she has these eyes, they change in different lights, sometimes blue, sometimes gray, and her laugh. Violet smiled despite herself. She just learned to laugh the week before she was taken. The tiniest things delight her. Drake listened attentively as Violet recounted Emily's short life, her first smile, how she loved to be sung to, the way she would reach for Violet's hair with her tiny hands. You're a good mother, Drake said quietly when she finished. How can you know that? Violet asked, suddenly vulnerable. Because good mothers know their children, really know them. The way you talk about Emily, that's not just love, that's understanding. The train rattled on toward Boise, where they would change to another line bound for Salt Lake City. As the day wore on, Violet found herself studying Drake when he wasn't looking. The hard lines of his face softened when he thought no one was watching. Once, she caught him staring at a family further down the car, a mother with an infant and a father who bounced the baby on his knee. "You have children, Mr. Blackwell," she ventured. A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his face before he masked it. "No, madam. Family, none living." The simple statement held volumes, and Violet didn't press further. Instead, she offered a truth of her own. "I don't have family either. My parents died of fever 3 years ago. It's why I married Thomas so quickly, I think. I was lonely." Drake's eyes met hers with unexpected understanding. "Loneliness makes us vulnerable. Is that why you became a tracker? To avoid people?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Partly. Mostly because I'm good at finding things and people that don't want to be found. And what were you before that?" Drake looked out the window, his profile stark against the passing landscape. "Many things. Soldier in the war, ranch hand, for a while a bounty hunter." "Is that how you got that scar?" Violet asked before she could stop herself, gesturing to the mark along his jaw. Drake's hand went to the scar unconsciously. "No, that was from before, a reminder of a different life." He offered nothing more, and something in his expression told Violet not to ask. They lapsed into silence as the train continued its eastward journey, each lost in their own thoughts. In Boise, they changed trains for the longer stretch to Salt Lake City. The new car was more crowded, forcing them to sit side by side. As night fell and most passengers dozed, Violet found herself leaning against Drake's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. She woke hours later to find that someone Drake had placed his jacket over her like a blanket. He sat beside her, still awake, his eyes alert as he watched over the sleeping car. "You should rest," she whispered. "I'll sleep when we find Emily," he replied, his voice equally low. Violet studied his profile in the dim light of the oil lamps. "Why do you care so much about a child you've never met?" Drake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible over the train's rhythm. "I had a sister once, Hannah. Younger than me by 10 years. Our parents died when I was 18, she was 8. I did my best to raise her, but times were hard in Missouri after the war." His jaw tightened. "A wealthy family offered to take her in, said they'd give her education, opportunities I couldn't. I refused." Violet waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I went to fight in a border dispute, thinking the money would help us. When I came back 3 months later, she was gone. The same family had convinced the town she'd be better off with them. They'd moved west with her. I tracked them for 2 years. His voice hardened. "Found them in Colorado. They'd worked her like a servant, not a daughter. She died of pneumonia 2 weeks before I arrived." "Oh, Drake," Violet breathed, unconsciously using his first name. "I'm so sorry." His eyes, when they met hers, held a determination that transcended the pain of his memories. "I couldn't save Hannah, but I can help you save Emily." Without thinking, Violet reached for his hand in the darkness. After a moment's hesitation, his fingers closed around hers, rough and warm and reassuring. They remained that way until dawn broke over the Utah territory, hands clasped as the train carried them ever closer to Salt Lake City, and the child who waited, unknowing, for their arrival. Salt Lake City rose before them like a mirage in the late afternoon sun. A sprawling settlement nestled in the valley beneath towering mountains. The Mormon capital was unlike any place Violet had seen before, with its wide streets laid out in a precise grid and the imposing temple under construction at its center. "The address Thomas gave us is in the Northern District," Drake said as they disembarked. "Wealthier area." They secured rooms at a modest hotel near the station, separate rooms, though Drake insisted his should be adjacent to Violet's for protection. After washing away the travel dust and changing into her one clean dress, Violet met Drake in the hotel dining room. "We should go now," she said, too anxious to eat the meal set before her. "They could leave any day." Drake shook his head. "It's nearly evening. We need a plan before confronting them. These are wealthy people, Mrs. Reynolds. They believe they've legally adopted your daughter. But they haven't." Violet protested. "Thomas had no right, I know," Drake said gently. "But charging in without thinking could make things worse. We need to approach this carefully." Reluctantly, Violet saw the wisdom in his words. "What do you suggest?" "First, we learn about the Millers. Their reputation in San Francisco, their standing here. Knowledge gives us leverage." They spent the evening gathering information. Drake's quiet authority and occasional flash of silver coins loosened tongues throughout the city. By nightfall, they had learned that Alexander Miller was indeed a prominent shipping magnate from San Francisco, known for his philanthropic endeavors and impeccable social standing. His wife Catherine had been unable to bear children after multiple miscarriages, a tragedy whispered about in social circles. "They're staying with Catherine's sister, Elizabeth Hargrove," Drake reported as they reconvened at the hotel. "Respected family. The Hargroves have connections with both the Mormon church leaders and the territorial government." Violet's hope faltered. "How can we fight such people? They have money connections." "But they don't have the law on their side," Drake reminded her. "No matter how they disguised it, they purchased a child. That's not legal anywhere in this country." "Then we go to the authorities." Drake considered this. "Not yet. The local law might favor prominent visitors over a stranger's claims. We need to confront them directly first, see what they say." "And if they refuse to give Emily back?" Drake's expression hardened. "Then we take more direct measures." The next morning, they hired a carriage to take them to the Hargrove residence in the Northern District. The house was impressive, a 3-story mansion set back from the road, surrounded by gardens and a wrought iron fence. As they approached the gate, Violet's courage nearly deserted her. What if Emily didn't recognize her? What if the Millers had already left? What if Drake's hand covered hers where it rested on the carriage seat? "We'll find her," he said simply. The housekeeper who answered the door regarded them suspiciously. "Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove are not receiving visitors today," she announced, already beginning to close the door. Drake placed his boot in the doorway, preventing its closure. "We're here to see the Millers. It's an urgent family matter." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "The Millers are occupied with their new child. They specifically requested no disturbances." Violet stepped forward. "That child is my daughter. Please, tell Mrs. Miller that Violet Reynolds is here regarding Emily." The housekeeper hesitated, taken aback by Violet's direct claim. "Wait here," she finally said, closing the door with Drake's boot removed. Minutes later, the door opened again. A well-dressed woman in her 30s stood there, her blonde hair arranged elegantly beneath a lace cap, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "I am Catherine Miller," she said, her cultured voice betraying her San Francisco upbringing. "My housekeeper says you're claiming some connection to our daughter." "Emily is my daughter," Violet stated firmly, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "She was taken from me unlawfully." Catherine Miller paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Our adoption was arranged properly through Mr. Reynolds. He assured us. Thomas Reynolds is my husband, Violet interrupted. He had no right to arrange any adoption, especially without my knowledge or consent. Mrs. Miller's hand went to her throat. This is absurd, Alexander. She called over her shoulder. A distinguished-looking man appeared in the hallway behind her, his bearing that of someone accustomed to authority. What's happening, Catherine? As Mrs. Miller explained in agitated whispers, Drake studied the interior of the house visible through the doorway. Violet followed his gaze and noticed what had caught his attention, a cradle visible in the parlor beyond. Mr. Miller, Drake said, drawing the man's attention. You seem like a reasonable man. You must understand the gravity of this situation. If you purchased a child without the mother's consent, purchased, Miller sputtered indignantly. We did no such thing. We paid a standard adoption fee to Mr. Reynolds, who assured us his wife was unfit and had abandoned the child. Violet gasped. That's a lie. I never abandoned Emily. Please lower your voice, Miller said, glancing nervously toward the cradle. The baby is sleeping. My baby, Violet corrected, her voice breaking. Please let me see her. The Millers exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Catherine Miller stepped aside. Come in. But understand, we believed everything was legitimate. We have papers. Papers signed only by Thomas, Drake guessed as they entered the ornate foyer. Miller nodded reluctantly. He said his wife had relinquished all rights. Violet moved toward the parlor, drawn by an invisible thread to the cradle in the corner. As she approached, her heart thundered in her chest. What if it wasn't Emily? What if Thomas had lied about everything? But the moment she looked into the cradle, all doubt vanished. There lay her daughter, her dark curls framing her peaceful sleeping face, her tiny fists curled beside her cheeks just as they always had been. Emily, Violet whispered, tears streaming down her face. As if sensing her mother's presence, the baby stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For one breathless moment, mother and daughter stared at each other. Then Emily's face broke into a radiant smile of recognition. Her arms reaching up toward Violet, Violet lifted her daughter from the cradle, holding her close, breathing in the sweet, familiar scent of her. Emily cooed and patted Violet's tear-streaked face with her tiny hands. She knows me, Violet said, her voice thick with emotion. She knows her mother. Catherine Miller watched the reunion with growing distress. We didn't know, she said softly. Truly, we didn't know she had been taken against your will. Alexander Miller's face had hardened. Reynolds will pay for this deception. We never would have, he broke off, visibly struggling to maintain composure. Drake approached the Millers while Violet reunited with Emily. I believe you, he said quietly, but you must understand that the child belongs with her mother. Mrs. Miller's eyes filled with tears as she watched Emily nestled against Violet's shoulder. She's been fussy since we got her, she admitted. Nothing we did seemed to soothe her. But look at her now. The baby was already falling back asleep, content in her mother's arms, one tiny hand gripping Violet's collar. Mr. Miller placed a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. We wanted a child so desperately, he explained to Drake. When Reynolds approached us through a mutual acquaintance, saying his wife had abandoned their baby and he couldn't care for her alone, it seemed like providence. A convenient story, Drake observed without judgment. We should have questioned it more, Miller acknowledged. But Catherine had just suffered another loss, and when we saw Emily, he sighed heavily. We wanted to believe. Violet approached them, Emily sleeping peacefully in her arms. I understand wanting a child, she said softly to Catherine, but Emily is mine, my heart, my soul. Catherine Miller wiped away a tear. I can see that now. The way she responded to you, she never did that with me. Alexander Miller squared his shoulders. We'll need to make this right legally. I have contacts who can draw up the proper papers immediately, nullifying the fraudulent adoption." "And the money you paid Thomas?" Drake asked. Miller's expression hardened. "We'll deal with Reynolds separately. This isn't about money anymore." Within hours, the Millers had arranged for a judge to come to the house. Papers were signed acknowledging Violet's rightful custody and the fraudulent nature of Thomas's actions. The Millers even insisted on providing Violet with funds to secure her and Emily's future, not as payment for the child, they were careful to emphasize, but as restitution for the ordeal they had unknowingly caused. "What will you do now?" Catherine asked Violet as they prepared to leave. Violet looked down at Emily, who was awake again and contentedly playing with a lock of her mother's hair. "Go home, I suppose, although I'm not sure where home is anymore." "You could stay in Salt Lake," Mrs. Miller suggested. "Start fresh." Violet shook her head. "Too many memories of today. I think we need somewhere new." As they walked back to their hotel, Emily secure in Violet's arms and Drake carrying the basket of baby supplies the Millers had insisted they take, Violet felt both exhausted and exhilarated. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually found her." Drake's smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his blue eyes. "You never doubted we would, didn't I? I seem to recall a lot of doubt. Not where it counted." At the hotel, Violet settled Emily in a makeshift bed in her room. The baby, overwhelmed by the day's events, fell asleep quickly. Violet joined Drake in the small sitting area outside their rooms. "I can never repay you," she said earnestly. "What you did for us." Drake shook his head. "Seeing you with her is payment enough. What will you do now?" "Return to Oregon City." Something shifted in Drake's expression. "Eventually. I have some business in Colorado first." Violet felt an unexpected pang at the thought of parting ways. Over the past days, Drake Blackwell had become more than just her daughter's rescuer. He had become the first person in years she truly trusted. "Emily and I will be heading back to Oregon," she said carefully. "Though not to Oregon City. Too many memories of Thomas there." "Where will you go?" Violet considered. "I have some skills as a seamstress. Any growing town would need that." Drake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face. "There's a place in eastern Oregon, small cattle town called Promise, growing fast enough to need skilled people." "Promise," Violet repeated, testing the name. "That sounds hopeful." "It is." Drake hesitated, then added, "My ranch is nearby, nothing fancy but the land's good. I've been away too long as it is." Violet's heart quickened at the implication. "Your ranch," Drake nodded. 10 years building it. Left a foreman in charge while I was tracking a bounty in Pendleton. That's where I was returning from when I met you. You never mentioned you had a home." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never had reason to." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. "Promise might be a good place for Emily," Violet said softly. "For both of us." "It might at that," Drake agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. From Violet's room came a small cry as Emily woke, hungry and disoriented in the strange surroundings. Violet rose immediately, but paused at her door. "Would you like to meet her properly?" "Now that everything's calmer." Drake looked startled, then touched by the invitation. He nodded and followed Violet into her room. Emily lay in the center of the bed, her little face scrunched in complaint. When Violet lifted her, she immediately quieted, her eyes wide as she took in the stranger behind her mother. "Emily, this is Mr. Blackwell," Violet said softly. "He helped bring you back to me." Drake approached cautiously, removing his hat. "Hello, little one," he said, his deep voice gentling in a way Violet hadn't heard before. Emily stared at him solemnly, then unexpectedly reached out one tiny hand toward his face. Drake looked to Violet for permission before stepping closer. She wants to touch your beard, Violet explained with a smile. She's curious about everything. Drake leaned down, allowing the baby to pat his bearded cheek with her small palm. Emily gurgled in delight at the novel texture. She likes you, Violet observed. Drake's eyes, when they met Violet's over the baby's head, held something new, a tentative warmth, a cautious hope. Smart girl, he said softly, just like her mother. The journey to Promise took them through winding mountain passes and across stretches of high desert, the landscape growing more rugged and beautiful with each mile. They traveled by train as far as the rails would take them, then hired a wagon for the final stretch. Emily proved to be a surprisingly good traveler, content to watch the changing scenery or sleep nestled against her mother. During the long hours on the road, the barriers between Violet and Drake gradually lowered. He spoke of his years building the ranch, the herd of cattle he'd slowly grown, the house he'd constructed with his own hands. Violet shared stories of her childhood in Portland, her dreams of one day having her own dress shop, the poetry she wrote in secret that no one, not even Thomas, had ever read. "I'd like to read it someday," Drake said when she mentioned her writing. "If you'd allow it." The request, simple as it was, meant more to Violet than he could know. Thomas had mocked her creative aspirations, calling them foolish wastes of time. "I'd like that," she replied. On the afternoon of the fourth day, Drake pointed to a distant ridge. "Promise is just beyond those hills." The town revealed itself gradually. As they crested the rise, a collection of wooden buildings surrounding a wide main street, nestled in a valley with a river winding along its eastern edge. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," Violet breathed, taking in the scene. "Wait until you see the sunrise over those mountains," Drake said, a note of pride in his voice. "Nothing like it anywhere." They approached from the north, passing scattered homesteads and small farms as they neared the town proper. People working in fields or tending livestock paused to wave at the wagon, curious about the newcomers. "Everyone seems so friendly," Violet observed. "Good people," Drake confirmed. "Hardworking. Most came here to start fresh, same as you're doing." They entered the main street as the afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings. The town was bigger than Violet had expected. A general store, hotel, saloon, church, schoolhouse, and various other businesses lined the street. People moved about their business, the atmosphere lively but unhurried. "We'll stop at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house first," Drake said, guiding the wagon toward a two-story building with a wide front porch. "She'll have a room for you and Emily until you decide where you want to settle." The boarding house was clean and welcoming, its proprietress a plump, gray-haired woman whose stern expression melted at the sight of Emily. "A baby. We don't get many little ones at my establishment," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed, immediately offering to hold her. After settling Violet and Emily into a comfortable corner room on the second floor, Drake hesitated at the door. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside town," he explained. "I should check on things there, let my foreman know I'm back." Violet felt a twinge of disappointment at his imminent departure, though she knew it was unreasonable. "Of course. You've been away for so long because of us." Drake shook his head. "I don't regret a single day of it." Their eyes met, the connection between them palpable in the quiet room. "Will you come back to town soon?" Violet asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Drake's smile was small but genuine. "Tomorrow, I'll introduce you around, help you get settled." He hesitated, then added, "If that's what you want." "It is," Violet confirmed, matching his smile with her own. After Drake left, Violet sat by the window with Emily in her lap, watching as he rode down the main street and out of town. Strange how in just over a week, This taciturn cowboy had become so important to her. To them both. The next day dawned clear and bright. Violet dressed Emily in her best gown, one of the few baby items they'd brought from Salt Lake City, and wore her own blue dress, freshly pressed by Mrs. Henderson's maid. Drake arrived mid-morning, looking somewhat transformed. He'd shaved his beard to a neat trimmer length, his hair was freshly cut, and he wore a clean shirt under his usual buckskin jacket. "You look different," Violet observed when she met him downstairs. A faint color touched Drake's cheeks. "Thought I should make myself presentable for introducing you around town." Their first stop was the general store, where Drake introduced Violet to the owner, Mr. Peterson, and his wife. Upon learning Violet was a skilled seamstress looking to establish herself, Mrs. Peterson became animated. "We've needed a proper dressmaker in Promise for years. I've been ordering fabrics and patterns for ladies who then have to sew everything themselves or send away to Portland for finished garments." By midday, word had spread through town about the newcomer with her baby and her dressmaking skills. Several women approached Violet as she and Drake ate lunch at the hotel restaurant, asking about commissions and offering welcome. "They like you," Drake observed after the third such interruption. "They're just curious," Violet demurred, though she was pleased by the warm reception. "No, they see what I see, someone special." The simple compliment warmed Violet more than she cared to admit. After lunch, they visited a small vacant shop on a side street off the main thoroughfare. "Mr. Turner owns it," Drake explained as he unlocked the door. "He's been holding it for the right business." The space was dusty but full of potential large windows in front for displaying garments, a back room that could serve as a workroom, even a small apartment above. "It's perfect," Violet breathed, already envisioning how she would arrange everything. "But the rent must be considerable." "Turner's reasonable," Drake assured her. "And with the advance orders you're likely to get, you'll manage fine." As they stood in the empty shop, Emily babbling happily in Violet's arms, the future suddenly seemed full of possibilities. For the first time since losing Emily, Violet allowed herself to truly hope. Over the following weeks, Violet established herself in Promise with surprising ease. The shop, which she named Violet's Fine Apparel, quickly attracted customers from town and surrounding ranches. Her skill with a needle impressed even the wealthiest ranch wives, and soon she had more commissions than she could easily fulfill. Drake visited town regularly, often bringing small gifts for Emily, a handcrafted wooden rattle, a tiny knitted blanket commissioned from a rancher's wife, a silver bracelet that would fit her when she was older. Each time he called at the shop, or the small apartment Violet had rented above it, Emily's face would light up with recognition and delight. "She's growing so fast," Drake remarked one evening as he watched Emily determinedly attempting to crawl across the floor of Violet's apartment. At nearly 8 months old, she was becoming more mobile and more curious by the day. "Too fast," Violet agreed with a mother's bittersweet pride. "I can hardly believe how much she's changed since." She didn't need to finish the sentence, since we found her hung unspoken between them. Drake's visits had become the highlight of Violet's weeks. They would talk for hours after Emily was asleep about the town, the ranch, books they had read, dreams they still harbored. He spoke more freely now, his initial reticence giving way to thoughtful conversation and, increasingly, laughter. Violet found herself watching for him from her shop window, her heart quickening at the sight of his tall figure dismounting before her door. At night, she would replay their conversations, analyzing his words and expressions for deeper meaning. "You've fallen for him, Mrs. Henderson observed bluntly one day when she came for a fitting, and caught Violet staring out the window as Drake rode away. That's not," Violet stammered, her cheeks flushing. The older woman chuckled. "No need to deny it. Half the unmarried women in this county have set their caps for Drake Blackwell over the years. None ever got close enough to try, until you." "We're just friends," Violet insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "He helped me when I needed it most." "MMHMM, Mrs." Henderson's knowing smile said she wasn't fooled. "And he rides 5 miles into town 3 times a week just to check on your friendship, I suppose." The conversation left Violet unsettled. She had been so focused on establishing her business and caring for Emily that she had allowed herself to ignore the growing feelings for Drake. But now that Mrs. Henderson had named them, Violet could no longer deny their existence. She loved him. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, unable to concentrate on her sewing, Violet bundled Emily up and took her for a walk through town. The autumn air was crisp, the setting sun painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. As they neared the edge of town, Violet was surprised to see a familiar figure approaching on horseback Drake, riding toward Promise despite having visited just yesterday. He dismounted when he saw them, leading his horse the remaining distance. "I was coming to find you," he said without preamble. "Is something wrong?" Violet asked, alarmed by his serious expression. Drake shook his head. "No, something's right, actually." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about Emily, about what I want my life to be." Violet's heart began to race. "And what have you decided?" Drake's eyes, so often guarded, were open and vulnerable now. "That I want you in it, both of you, if you'll have me." Emily chose that moment to reach out from Violet's arms toward Drake, babbling excitedly. Drake took her with practiced ease, settling her against his shoulder where she immediately began playing with the collar of his shirt. "She's made her opinion clear," Violet said with a smile, her voice slightly unsteady. "But I think I need to hear more about yours." Drake shifted Emily to one arm and reached for Violet's hand with his free one. "I love you, Violet Reynolds. I think I have since that first day in Oregon City when you stood in the sheriff's office, determined to find your daughter against all odds. You're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known." Tears welled in Violet's eyes. "Drake, let me finish before my courage fails," he said with a smile that betrayed his nervousness. "I know it hasn't been long. I know you've barely had time to recover from everything with Thomas. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find the person who makes you feel complete, you shouldn't wait." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Violet whispered. Drake nodded. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, if you'll come live at the ranch, make it a real home. If you'll let me be a father to Emily and maybe someday," he broke off, suddenly unsure. "More children," Violet finished for him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Only if you want that too," Drake said quickly. "I just want you, both of you." Violet stepped closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "I want that too, all of it. I love you, Drake Blackwell." His eyes widened as if he hadn't quite dared to hope for this outcome. "You do?" "With all my heart." Emily, sensing the importance of the moment, patted both their faces with her small hands, drawing laughter from them both. "I think that's her blessing," Drake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then I suppose my answer is yes," Violet replied, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the release of feelings too long contained. When they finally parted, both were breathless, and Emily was squirming impatiently between them. "When?" Drake asked simply. "As soon as possible," Violet answered without hesitation. "I've had one marriage of convenience. This time, I want to marry for love without delay." They were wed 2 weeks later in Promise's small church, with half the town in attendance. Violet wore a gown of her own creation, ivory silk with delicate lace she'd been saving for a special commission. Emily, dressed in a miniature version of her mother's dress, was held by Mrs. Henderson during the ceremony, though she reached persistently for Drake throughout. The ranch, when Violet first saw it as Drake's wife, took her breath away. Situated in a valley with mountains rising behind it, the property included a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that had turned golden with the season. "It's not fancy," Drake said apologetically as he carried her across the threshold, Emily following in the arms of Maria, the housekeeper Drake had hired in preparation for their arrival. "It's perfect," Violet corrected him, taking in the solid furniture, the stone fireplace, the large windows that filled the rooms with light. That night, after Emily was asleep in the nursery Drake had prepared adjacent to the master bedroom, husband and wife came together with a passion that surprised them both. All the tension and longing of the past months found release in their embrace, their bodies joining as naturally as their hearts already had. Afterward, lying in Drake's arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Violet felt a peace she had never known before. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured against his chest. Drake's arms tightened around her. "When I found you in that sheriff's office, I was just passing through. I had no intention of staying in Oregon City, no plans beyond the next bounty. What changed your mind?" Drake was silent for a moment, his hand tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "The look in your eyes," he finally said. "You were terrified but determined, willing to do anything to find your child. It reminded me of myself after Hannah was taken." Violet raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "You saw yourself in me," Drake shook his head. "No, I saw what I wished I could have been. You succeeded where I failed. You found Emily in time." Violet leaned down to kiss him gently. "We found her together." "Together," Drake repeated, drawing her back into his embrace. "That's how we'll do everything from now on." The months passed in a rhythm of ordinary days made extraordinary by shared love. Violet established a smaller dressmaking business on the ranch, taking commissions from the wives of neighboring ranchers and traveling to town twice a month to serve her customers there. Emily thrived in the fresh air and open spaces, growing strong and adventurous under the watchful eyes of both her mother and the man, who had quickly become her father in every way that mattered. Drake formally adopted Emily on her first birthday, the judge from Promise making a special trip to the ranch for the occasion. The celebration afterward, attended by friends from town and neighboring ranches, marked the first anniversary of their arrival in Promise as well. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything," Violet said to Drake as they watched Emily toddling determinedly across the yard, pursued by Maria's laughing children. "Now, I have more than I ever dreamed possible." Drake's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against him. "There's something I've been meaning to give you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying it since Salt Lake City." He pressed a small object into her palm, a gold locket on a delicate chain. When Violet opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Emily on one side, the space on the other empty. "For the next one," Drake explained softly, his hand moving to rest against her abdomen, where the first signs of their child had just begun to show. Violet's pregnancy had been confirmed by the doctor the previous week, filling them both with quiet joy. The baby would arrive in early spring, completing their family circle. "Boy or girl?" Drake asked, his voice full of wonder as it always was when they discussed the coming child. "A boy, I think," Violet replied, covering his hand with hers, with his father's eyes and stubborn determination. "As long as he has his mother's heart," Drake countered, bending to kiss her forehead. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate woman waiting on a bench in Oregon City, to the confident wife and mother she had become. From the solitary tracker with a haunted past to the loving husband and father Drake now was they had transformed each other through love and trust. The story that had begun with a missing child had become one of a family found, whole and complete at last. Emily ran to them then, her small face alight with the simple joy of being loved. Drake scooped her up, settling her on his shoulders where she giggled and patted the top of his head. "Mama." "Papa, up high," she exclaimed, one of the few phrases she had mastered. Violet's heart swelled at the sight of them, her daughter and the man who had helped bring her home, now joined together by bonds as strong as blood. "Look at the mountains, little one," Drake said, turning so Emily could see the sunset painting the peaks. "That's your home, all of it, as far as you can see." "Home," Emily repeated, her small hands gripping Drake's hair. "Yes, sweetheart," Violet agreed, reaching up to touch her daughter's leg. "Home." And in that moment, with the vast landscape spread before them and the promise of their future unfolding like the stars appearing in the twilight sky, Violet knew that some journeys were meant to be taken, no matter how difficult the path. For without the darkness that had come before, they might never have found the light they now shared. Drake's arm tightened around her shoulders as if he could read her thoughts. Together they stood, a family forged through loss and love, watching night descend on the land that was now, and would forever be, their home. 8 years later, the Blackwell Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the territory. The original homestead had expanded to include additional pastures, a larger barn, and an extension to the main house to accommodate their growing family. Emily, now 9 and tall for her age, had her mother's dark hair and her adopted father's blue eyes. She rode like she'd been born in the saddle, and showed a remarkable talent for drawing, filling sketchbooks with impressively detailed renderings of the ranch and its inhabitants. William, 7 years old and the spitting image of Drake with his strong jaw and serious expression, had inherited his mother's gentle nature along with his father's determination. Where Emily was outgoing and adventurous, William was thoughtful and methodical, preferring to observe before acting. Their youngest, 4-year-old Catherine, named for the woman who had unknowingly helped reunite Emily with her mother, was a perfect blend of both parents, with Violet's delicate features and Drake's unwavering confidence. On a crisp autumn morning much like the one when Drake had proposed years earlier, the family gathered on the front porch of their home. Drake and Violet sat side by side on the porch swing, watching their children play in the yard while the ranch hands went about their morning chores in the distance. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Violet asked, her head resting on Drake's shoulder. "If you hadn't been in that sheriff's office that day," Drake's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as William attempted to teach Catherine how to throw a lasso, with Emily offering enthusiastic but not particularly helpful advice. "Emily still asks about him occasionally," Violet said quietly. "Thomas, I mean," Drake nodded. "It's natural. She's old enough now to understand that I'm not her blood father." "You're her father in every way that matters," Violet said fiercely. "You're the one who helped bring her home, who taught her to ride, who reads to her every night." "I know," Drake assured her, "and she knows it too." but curiosity about where we come from is part of growing up. They had never hidden the truth from Emily, explaining in age-appropriate terms as she grew older how Drake had helped Violet find her when she was a baby. They hadn't shared all the details. The full story of Thomas's betrayal could wait until she was older, but Emily knew that Drake had come into her life when she was an infant and had chosen to be her father out of love. "I got a letter from Catherine Miller last week," Violet mentioned, changing the subject. "They finally adopted a child, a boy 5 years old whose parents died in a fire in Sacramento." Drake smiled. "I'm glad. They were good people who wanted a child for the right reasons, even if their methods were misguided at first." The Millers had remained in touch over the years, becoming unlikely friends. Their assistance in the aftermath of Emily's recovery had evolved into a genuine relationship conducted primarily through letters, with occasional visits when the Millers' business brought them to Oregon. "She says they're bringing him to visit next summer," Violet added. "I told her they're welcome anytime." Drake nodded his approval. "Our home is big enough for guests." "Our home," Violet repeated, still finding joy in the words after all these years. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." Drake turned to face her, his expression serious. "Do you ever regret it, coming to promise with me?" Violet's answer was immediate and emphatic. "Never, not for a single moment." The worry lines around Drake's eyes softened. Even after years of marriage and 3 children, he sometimes seemed amazed that she had chosen him, that the happiness they had found together was real and lasting. "What about you?" Violet asked. "Any regrets about taking on a ready-made family that day in the sheriff's office?" Drake's laugh rumbled in his chest. "My only regret is that I wasted so many years before finding you. Think of all the time we could have had together." "We have now," Violet reminded him. "And tomorrow and all the days after that." From the yard, Emily's voice called out, "Papa, come show Catherine how to do it properly." "William's making a mess of it." Drake rose, dropping a kiss on Violet's forehead before heading down the porch steps. "Duty calls." Violet watched as her husband joined their children, patiently demonstrating the proper technique for holding a lasso. Catherine's face lit up with adoration as she mimicked her father's movements, while Emily and William offered commentary from the sidelines. The scene before her, this family that had been forged through pain and loss and ultimately love, filled Violet's heart to overflowing. The journey that had begun in desperate circumstances had led to this moment of perfect contentment. As Drake looked up and caught her watching, his smile reflected everything she felt. Across the yard, their eyes met in wordless communication, the kind that comes only from years of shared life, of knowing another's heart as well as your own. In that smile was a promise kept, a vow renewed daily through actions rather than words. "Then we'll find that child no matter what." They had found Emily, and in doing so, they had found each other and the family they were always meant to be.